I never believed the phrase, "a house has memories," until the day I bought the one on Waverly Street. It was late autumn when I first saw it. A pale blue, two-story Victorian nestled behind a tangle of oak trees on a quiet, forgotten lane just outside town. The listing described it as charming but in need of love, a euphemism for the warped floorboards, the cracked windows, and the way the front porch sagged as if exhausted by time. But I didn't care. I was 27, desperate to leave behind the chaos of city life, and the price was a fraction of what I'd expected to pay. I told myself it was a fresh start. A blank page. Looking back now, I realized the page was already stained long before I ever touched it. The realtor, a woman named Denise, had been unusually quiet as she unlocked the front door. "It's been empty for a while," she explained, twisting the key with more effort than seemed necessary. "Couple of previous owners, but none of them stayed long. You know how old houses are, drafts, creaks, sometimes they can feel lonely." She forced a smile when the door finally opened with a reluctant groan. The inside smelled of dust and rain-soaked wood. Shafts of light cut through the gloom, revealing furniture outlines on the floorboards and faded wallpaper, curling like old parchment. Still, there was a certain charm in the decay. A massive oak staircase dominated the foyer, and to the left, a sitting room with a marble fireplace waited patiently for warmth. I walked through each room with a kind of reverence. Kitchen, study, upstairs bedrooms, all empty, all quiet. It felt like stepping into someone else's story. "What's the history?" I asked casually. Denise shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you know, built in 1911. Family home for most of the century. After that, some short-term owners. Place changed hands a few times. Any reason why?" Her eyes flickered toward the floorboards before she smiled again. "People move on. The first night was uneventful, if a little eerie. I had no furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor, a few boxes stacked in the hallway. Rain lashed the windows as I lay awake, listening to the house settle and groan. Old houses always make noise. I knew that, but there was something about the way these sounds lingered, as if footsteps were pacing just out of sight. Sometime past midnight, I heard it, a faint, deliberate tap-tap-tap beneath the floorboards. It stopped the second I held my breath. I laughed at myself, shaking off the nerves. "Rats," I whispered. "Probably just rats." But rats don't whisper, and I swear, just before I drifted back to sleep, I heard a voice. Faint, muffled, like someone calling my name from deep below. By the second week, the house had started to feel less like a project and more like home. I painted the study, repaired the leaky faucet, and even found an antique armchair at a thrift store. But the noises continued. Soft knocks, distant shuffling, and always that faint whispering beneath the floor. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the foundation was shifting. Maybe water was running through old pipes, but the sounds grew bolder, more distinct. Sometimes they came from beneath the stairs, other times from directly under my bed. One afternoon, while pulling up a section of warped floorboards in the hallway, I discovered something strange. The subfloor beneath was thicker than it should have been, like a second layer had been added. When I pried up a plank, a gust of stale air rushed out, cold and sour, and then I saw it. A gap, no more than a few inches wide, revealing darkness below. At first, I thought it was just a crawl space. But when I dropped a small flashlight inside, the beam didn't hit dirt. It illuminated what looked like wooden stairs, leading down. There were no blueprints that showed a basement. I spent an hour searching the property records online, combing through every diagram and renovation permit I could find. Nothing. No mention of a lower level. No sign it was ever built. That night I couldn't sleep. My ears strained against the silence, waiting for the tapping to start again. And when it did, louder, closer, more insistent, I made a decision. I was going down there. The next morning I widened the hole until I could fit through. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up to meet me, carrying a smell I couldn't place, part mildew, part copper, part the stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended, flashlight trembling in my hand. At the bottom was a narrow hallway, walls lined with rough stone. The floor was dirt, uneven and damp. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling like silk veils, and at the far end, half buried beneath collapsed beams and rubble, was a door. It was made of iron, heavy, rust-eaten, bolted shut from the outside. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep it closed. But why? I pressed my ear to the cold metal. At first there was nothing, then a sound tap, 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 followed by a whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. "Let us out." I stumbled back, heart pounding. The rational part of my brain screamed that it was impossible. Sound doesn't travel through iron like that. There couldn't be anyone inside, not after all these decades. But the whispering grew louder. More frantic, "Please." Cold. "Still here." I scrambled up the stairs and sealed the floorboards as best I could, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe air pressure, maybe my imagination. For the next several nights I avoided that hallway entirely, but the sounds didn't stop. They followed me through the house. The tapping came from beneath the kitchen tiles. The whispers rose from the bathroom floor, and one night, they said my name. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard it, a clear, unmistakable voice rising through the floor beneath my mattress. "Daniel." I bolted upright, breath ragged. "Daniel, help us." I knew then that ignoring it wasn't an option. The next morning I pried the floorboards up again and descended with a crowbar and hammer. The iron door loomed ahead, its bolts crusted with rust. My hands shook as I pried them loose one by one. When the last bolt fell, the door groaned and swung open. The air that poured out was colder than winter. And it smelled wrong, like earth and death and something far older. Inside was a small chamber, barely 6 feet square. Chains dangled from the ceiling. Dark stains marked the floor. And in the far corner, half buried in dirt, were bones, dozens of them. Human bones, skulls, ribs, small, delicate hands. I don't remember how long I stood there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I called the police the next morning. They sealed off the property and spent days excavating the chamber. In total, they found 11 bodies. Men, women, even children. The coroner estimated they'd been buried there between 1940 and 1970. All had signs of blunt force trauma. None were ever reported missing. The case made the local news briefly. "Mass grave discovered in historic home," the headline read. They speculated about serial killers, secret cults, organized crime, but no suspects were ever identified. And when the police left, the house was mine again, empty, quiet, but not silent. The whispers returned 2 nights later. Only now, they were angry. I woke to a rhythmic pounding beneath my bed, like fists beating against wood. The walls shuddered. My books toppled from the shelves. And through it all, I heard them. "You let us out. You left us there. You should have left us alone." The pounding grew violent. Plaster cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. And then abruptly it stopped. I sat awake until dawn, too terrified to move. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything. Priests, mediums, even a paranormal investigator I found online. None of it worked. The voices persisted, sometimes screaming, sometimes sobbing. Once I found the word liar carved into my bedroom floor. Another morning, every door in the house stood wide open. The worst was the night I saw them. I was walking down the hallway when I noticed the air shift. Colder, heavier. The shadows along the walls seemed to ripple. And then, one by one, they stepped out. 11 figures, pale, hollow-eyed, broken. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there staring at me with that same expression, a mix of sorrow and rage. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. I left the house a month later. Packed what little I owned and never went back. The real estate agent didn't ask questions. She just nodded when I told her I wanted it gone. It sold 2 weeks later to a young couple with a baby. I thought about warning them, about the whispers, the bones, the things beneath the floor. But what would I even say? "Your house is haunted by the dead buried beneath it?" They would have laughed, so I said nothing. That was 6 years ago. I've moved 3 times since then. Changed jobs, changed cities. But no matter where I go, I still hear them. Some nights, just as I'm drifting to sleep, a faint tapping echoes from beneath the floor. Tap, tap, tap. And then the whisper comes, soft and cold, curling into my ear like smoke. "Daniel, let us out." I don't know what's worse, that they're still trapped down there, or that maybe, just maybe, they followed me out. I never planned to stop there. The motel wasn't even on the map. It wasn't on any map. But that night, somewhere between Bakersfield and the Nevada line, with rain hammering my windshield and my eyes burning from 20 straight hours on the road, I saw the faded neon flicker in the distance. Vacancy. Just one word, in blood-red letters that sputtered against the storm. I told myself I'd only rest for a few hours, just enough to keep from falling asleep at the wheel. But I should have kept driving. I should have listened to that instinct deep in my gut, the one that whispered, "Keep going, don't stop here." Because that night, at a place that shouldn't exist, I stopped being sure of what was real. And I don't think I've truly woken up since it was past 1 a.m. when I pulled into the lot. The place was called the Moonlight Inn. At least that's what the cracked, paint-chipped sign above the office said. 12 units stretched in a horseshoe around a patch of dead grass and a flickering streetlight. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no signs of life. The rain fell in sheets, blurring the world beyond my headlights. I almost turned around, but I was exhausted. And there was something strangely comforting about the sight of that red neon. It felt like a relic from another time, a place frozen in the 1970s and left to rot. The office door creaked open before I could knock. A man stepped out, thin, pale hair slicked back like wet straw. He wore a cheap button-down shirt and smiled too much. "Rough night, huh?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for a few hours." "Of course. Always room here." He slid a dusty ledger across the counter. "Name and license plate." I hesitated. "You don't take cards?" He chuckled, low and dry. "Cash only. We like to keep things simple here." I scrawled my name, Mark Jensen, and paid in crumpled bills. He handed me an old brass key with a worn leather tag. "Room 9, he said. "End of the row." The room smelled of mildew and stale air, like a place that hadn't been opened in decades. The wallpaper was peeling. The carpet was thin and stiff. The bed sagged in the middle like something heavy had slept there too long. But I didn't care. I tossed my bag on the chair and collapsed onto the mattress, boots and all. The rain beat against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a neon sign buzzed and hummed. And beneath it all, faint but constant, was a low drip, drip, drip. Maybe a leaking pipe, maybe a faucet. I closed my eyes. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke, something felt wrong. The room was colder, too cold. My breath fogged in the dark. The rain had stopped. The neon buzz was gone. And yet the dripping continued. Louder now, rhythmic, almost deliberate. Drip, drip, drip. I swung my legs off the bed and froze. The carpet was wet. A dark patch spread out from beneath the bathroom door, soaking into the floor. My first thought was a burst pipe. But when I opened the door, the sink and shower were dry. The dripping was coming from the ceiling. Steady drops falling into the bathtub from a single rust-colored stain. Water, I told myself. Just water. But then I smelled it. Metallic. Sharp. Not water. Blood. I stumbled back, heart hammering. It was impossible. The room above mine was empty. The clerk had said I was the only guest. And yet something was leaking through the ceiling. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Enough. I'd sleep in the car, storm or no storm. But when I stepped outside, the rain was gone. The sky was perfectly clear, and the parking lot was full. Dozens of cars, old models, rusted and dented, lined the lot. Some with broken windows, others covered in dust so thick they looked welded to the ground. None of them had been there when I arrived, and the office light was out. I went to knock anyway. No answer. The door was locked. That's when I saw the ledger through the glass. My name was still there. But now there were dozens of others beneath it, each written in a different hand, each name marked with a red slash, all except mine. I backed away, pulse thundering in my ears. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I needed to leave. Now. I hurried to my car. My keys were gone. I searched every pocket, every inch of the parking lot, nothing. Lose something? The voice made me spin. It was the clerk. But something about him was off. His smile was too wide, his eyes too dark, and when he spoke, his breath curled in the cold night air. "Room 9 suits you," he said. "Most people don't make it that far." "What the hell is this?" I demanded. "Where are my keys?" He tilted his head. "You checked in, you stay. That's the rule." I took a step back, then another. And when I turned to run, every door to every room swung open at once. They stood in the doorways watching me. Men, women, children. all pale, hollow-eyed, silent. Their clothes were soaked, their skin mottled in gray. Some had ropes around their necks. Others had gashes, bruises, burns. They didn't move. Didn't speak, just stared. Guess, the clerk said, grinning. Just like you, I ran. Past the cars, past the neon sign, down the highway. I didn't stop until my legs gave out and I collapsed by the roadside, gasping in the cold. When a trucker found me an hour later, I told him I'd been stranded. I didn't mention the motel. I didn't mention the blood because when I looked back, it wasn't there. The police searched for it. They found nothing. No sign of a motel on Route 41. No structure, no neon sign, not even a patch of asphalt. I convinced myself I'd hallucinated. Maybe exhaustion, maybe dehydration. I went home. Tried to forget, but I couldn't. The dreams started first, and the dripping, the faces, the rows of doors slamming open. Then came the waking moments. Flashes of neon reflected in my window, the smell of mildew on my clothes, the cold breath of strangers watching me from the corner of the room. And always, I hear it, drip, drip, drip. The sound of something leaking through the ceiling. 3 months later, I was driving to a conference in Nevada. Same highway, same stretch of road, and there it was, the sign, faded, buzzing, glowing red against the night. Vacancy. I drove past it without slowing, but in the rearview mirror for just a second I saw room 9's door swing open, and standing there smiling that too-wide smile was the clerk. I don't drive that way anymore. I take detours even if it adds hours. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I see the glow again, far in the distance, calling me back. And I know one day, whether I mean to or not, I'll stop. I'll pull into that parking lot and the room will be waiting, and this time I won't wake up. It's been 2 years since that night. I sleep with the lights on. I haven't closed my eyes in a hotel room since, but every once in a while, when the house is quiet and I'm drifting towards sleep, I hear it again, drip, 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 and then a voice soft and familiar, curling like smoke through the darkness. Room 9 is ready for you, Mark. I've lived in plenty of apartments over the years, noisy ones, moldy ones, places with roaches the size of my thumb, but none of them ever felt alive. This one does. And I don't mean that in the charming, characterful old building sort of way. I mean it breathes. It listens. And lately I'm almost sure it watches me. When I first moved into Harrington Apartments, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. A fresh start. A new chapter after the messy breakup. The job I left behind. The years of living in places that reminded me too much of who I used to be. It was a squat, brown brick building from the 1950s. Squeezed between two newer high-rises like an unwanted relative at a family photo. The rent was cheap, the neighbors seemed quiet, and my unit 4C had a decent view of the street below. That was enough for me. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I unpacked. I settled into a routine. I learned the quirks of the building. The water pressure was terrible, the elevator creaked like a dying animal, and the radiators hissed at odd hours. Normal apartment stuff. But then, little by little, the weirdness started creeping in. It began with footsteps at around 3 a.m. Every few nights I'd hear them pacing above me, slow, deliberate heavy steps across the ceiling, like someone in boots walking from one corner of the room to the other, back and forth, always the same rhythm. At first I assumed it was just the neighbor upstairs, the guy in 4B. I'd never met him, but I'd seen him once in the hallway, tall, tail wearing a dark overcoat even though it was the middle of June. He'd given me a stiff nod and disappeared into his apartment without a word. But what struck me was this. 4B was supposed to be empty. I'd asked the super about it when I moved in. Nobody's lived there in years, he'd said, shaking his head. Guy died inside. Heart attack. His family never claimed the place. We just keep it locked. So who the hell was pacing above me every night? I tried to brush it off. Old buildings make noises, pipes groan, wood expands. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I climbed the stairwell up one floor and walked down the dimly lit hallway to 4B. The door was old, paint peeling, brass numbers barely hanging on. A thin line of light glowed beneath it. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, louder. The footsteps stopped. Then after a beat they resumed, but now they were coming toward the door. My heart thudded. I took a step back. The sound stopped right at the threshold, and for a long, awful moment nothing happened. Then something scraped against the inside of the door, like nails dragging down wood. I bolted back to my apartment and locked the door behind me. The next day, I went to the super again. His name was Frank, a heavy-set man with nicotine-stained fingers and a permanent frown. "There's someone in 4B, I told him. I heard footsteps. I saw a light. He gave me a look like I was wasting his time. "Kid, there's no one up there. The place is sealed. I got the only key." "Then how do you explain the old pipes, settling beams? You're hearing things." He waved me off. "Happens to everyone in this building sooner or later." I left feeling frustrated, but more than that, unsettled. Because that night, the footsteps didn't stop at the ceiling. They came down the wall. I swear to God, I was lying in bed around 2:45 a.m. when I heard them. At first, they were faint, like a cat padding along a shelf. Then louder, thump, 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 like boots walking vertically. The steps descended the wall adjacent to my bed, paused just above the floor, and then, unbelievably, started pacing behind my headboard. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. A week later, the sounds changed. It wasn't footsteps anymore. It was whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, distant voices bleeding through the walls. But when I pressed my ear to the plaster, the sound was inside the wall. Low, muffled. 2, maybe 3 voices, whispering things I couldn't quite catch, except for one word repeated over and over. "Below." I started losing sleep. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced someone was standing just beyond my bedroom door. Every time the radiator hissed or the building creaked, I'd jump. I began leaving the lights on at night. I even stopped using my bedroom altogether and started sleeping on the couch. But the sounds followed me. One night, while I was dozing off in the living room, I woke to the sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, wet breathing. It was coming from beneath the floor. I pressed my palm against the hardwood. It was cold, damp, and faintly vibrating, like something was shifting beneath the planks. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I called a locksmith and paid him to open 4B. Frank would kill me if he found out, but I didn't care. I needed answers. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan. The air inside was wrong, stale and heavy, thick with the smell of rot and mildew. The apartment was stripped bare. Dust covered every surface. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin from the walls. But the strangest thing was the floor. Every board was slightly bowed inward, like the wood had been sucked down from below. And in the center of the living room, there was a trapdoor. It was subtle, almost invisible beneath a layer of dust, but it was there. No handle, no hinges, just a faint seam outlining a square in the wood. My pulse hammered. I pried it open with a crowbar. Beneath it was a hole, a black yawning space that swallowed the light from my flashlight. A rotting wooden ladder descended into darkness, and from that darkness came a voice below. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a hiss right against my ear. Even though the hole was several feet away, I dropped the trapdoor and ran. I didn't go back up there again. Not for days. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that stress and exhaustion had twisted my senses. But deep down I knew better. There was something beneath this building, something that moved, something that spoke, and it wasn't finished with me.